Okay, good morning everyone. It's 9 a.m., so I'm being told we can start this session. If you're still coming into the room, there are loads of seats in front, so please go and take a seat. Good morning. So my name is Maria Lindsley, and I work for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and I'm here today with organizing this session together with IMID, International Water Management Institute, and UNEP DHI. And we're very happy to see so many of you here in the morning, especially knowing it's the last day. So we just have to get through today. So thank you for being here. This session, we want to focus on how transboundary cooperation can deliver where it needs to deliver. And particularly in the backdrop of mounting pressures from climate change. So we have a great set of speakers today, actually, and we hope to get some good audience interaction as well. You'll all have opportunity to speak directly to our speakers. So we will start with two presentations that will set the scene, talking a little bit on where we are with transboundary cooperation, is it doing what we need to, and a framing of the session. Then we'll get 4 Ignite speakers who will share their examples of where they have seen cooperation delivering and the challenges and some of how they solved this. We'll also then, each of them will sit down at a table and you get a chance to have a facilitated discussion with them to get them deeper into the mechanisms they saw as key for delivering cooperation and what works and what doesn't, and the strategic levers. And then the panelists will get back on stage and we'll have a facilitated panel debate at the end. So we hope we'll still manage to keep you interested and keep you engaged for one of these final sessions at this World Water Week. And I'll now pass on to my colleague, Diego Jara. He's our environmental law officer at IUCN, and he's going to give an intro presentation. Diego.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much, colleagues, for being here. We know it's the last day of the World Water Week. And perhaps one of the advantages that we have for this session is that we have already seen different other sessions, conversations on aspects of water cooperation and water diplomacy that I would like you also to consider, to observe during this session. To start, I just wanted to mention, to set the scene. We have been discussing during this whole week about water cooperation, its importance, its role, and the key message in all of these discussions has been water cooperation needs to evolve. And water cooperation as well doesn't only need to focus on rivers and water. When we talk about water cooperation, many just mentioned the 313 river basin, the transboundary river basins. But what about the 300 shared wetlands and the nearly 600 shared aquifers? Also, because in these geographic areas, there is not only the mangroves, the wetlands, peatlands, but also aquatic biodiversity. And this is why we consider that water cooperation also needs to involve looking at the different dimensions, environmental, social, economic, political, and technical, that are included in each one of these basins. Just to mention the key or the main challenges to these shared freshwater ecosystems, climate change, population growth, and sustainable economic development and pollution are still needed to be addressed. And this is where states have to work towards with river basin organizations, with environmental organizations, with NGOs, with the private sector as well. I don't need to emphasize on this, but of course cooperation is essential for the integrity of nature, but also it should look into human rights, the protection of the human rights. We have already been discussing about which rights those are: healthy environment, right to water, right to food, right to biodiversity. Why? Because water is essential to ensure these rights. Just to mention as well that formal water cooperation, we want to look at this formal and informal water cooperation, and we are going to discuss this in the panel discussion, exists through mainly agreements, institutions, and rules of procedure. But even in the case of these agreements, we see that these agreements have evolved, mainly looking at specific uses and activities of water, being hydropower, water allocation, flood control. And what we have analyzed, what we have discovered, is that during the past 20 years, during the past 10 years, these agreements are decreasing. And what does this mean? Cooperation is also failing? The countries do not want to cooperate anymore? Or what is the reason behind this decrease in water agreements? In the same way, in terms of institutions, we see from the 120 river basin organizations in the world, mainly that were created, established during the 60s and the 70s, we have seen now this discussion on, are they really fulfilling their mandate or not? Are they only these institutions to coordinate specific activities, events, prepare reports, for instance? What else do they need to do? In some sessions, many colleagues said they also need to serve as financial institutions in order to be vehicles to bring funds from global banks, from regional banks, in order to prepare to implement national transboundary activities. But what about their the mandate and the competences of these river basin organizations? Are they prepared for this? These are key aspects of formal water cooperation. And finally, just setting the scene for the next speakers, we see that there is still lots to do in terms of water cooperation. It is not that water cooperation should be decreasing at the moment or agreements should be decreasing, but actually we have to work together as research institutes, environmental organizations, countries towards strengthening this. Why? Because we see that only 20 shared aquifers are covered by an agreement out of the 600 or nearly 600 that we discussed at the beginning of this keynote. Also that only less than 15 transboundary water agreements make specific reference to wetlands. We have, thankfully, experts here as well who can tell you a little bit more, and that is going to be key when we have an opportunity to discuss between ourselves what we need to do in order to strengthen this area. Definitely the complexities of water cooperation, and for this, in terms of climate change, less than 10% of water agreements adopted since the 80s, where climate change started being a key issue at the global level, include drought consideration, and also just 10% of these agreements adopted since the 2000 consider climate change. And what about public participation and the role of non-state actors? Only 100 treaties out of nearly 900 consider clauses on public participation. So with this, you already see how the scenario looks like. Water cooperation needs to be strengthened, and it's a role for many different actors in order to ensure that this is done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego. Particularly thank you for giving us these numbers and these statistics, which very much help us set the scene for Jonathan's presentation. So Jonathan Lautze is Research Group Leader on Integrated Water Management of Basins and Aquifers from IMI, and he will then give a framing of this session.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Maria. And thanks, good collaborating with IUCN in this session, and thanks, Diego, for highlighting some of the limitations or insufficiencies of water cooperation. Although one minor note in terms of the number of transboundary aquifers, one of the sessions earlier this week, I think the magic number now is 426, so slightly reduced from the 600 that I think you had there. Yeah, in any case, so I was asked to give a framing of this session. One of the interesting things about this session is it's a sequel. We did a session last year with IUCN, IMI, OSU as well. This year it's DHI that's joined the team. So we're able to build on that. So I wanted to just kind of frame it very, very briefly, some of the progress made in 2024 in last year's sessions and how that brings us over to 2025. Yeah, so the title of last year's session was, is cooperation, is it fit for principle, but does it fall short on purpose? What we're ultimately trying to do with cooperation. So I think the kind of framing for the session last year is clearly there's a lot to celebrate. We've come a long way. Let's not overlook that. Some of these highlights are listed there. There's a lot of agreements on transboundary cooperation. I think the number is 800, although Zoe is probably thinking there maybe there's a more precise number than that. But I think this came out from last year's session that there's more than 800 agreements have now been signed. The scope has grown. There's more focus on groundwater. So, as Diego was referring to, it's less than 20, but 10 years ago it was probably less than 5. So clearly there's movement and it's positive. There's a lot of, and then climate change, there's a lot of progress to go, but equally 20 years ago we were probably scantily mentioning climate change. Now it's beginning to be mentioned. So there's clearly a range of points of progress that should not be overlooked, and we should recognize that. Nonetheless, we should ask ourselves the hard question, as Diego was pointing out, is this sufficient or should we be doing more? So sometimes it's tough to objectively pin these questions down, or answers to these questions, sorry. But basically, one objective measure is, are we going to achieve the SDG target? Is every transboundary water body going to have an agreement or an operational arrangement by 2030? I think there's increasing recognition it's probably going to be no. We're not going to get there. Some of the discussions surrounding last year's session also dug a little bit deeper, in a little bit less objectively, but maybe more importantly, there were other key discussion threads that came through, which are shown there on the bottom around financing, which is a repeated challenge. I think Diego was referring to this need for RBOs to act as vehicles of resource mobilization, which consumes a lot of time and energy at the expense of actually doing what they're supposed to do, which is strengthening basin management. Visibility also, can transboundary waters and the institutions that govern them, RBOs, are they a bit marginalized and you could say invisible? Do they lack power? And do they have really interesting agreements that create the parameters of their management on paper? Are those on paper, but then effectively translating into fuzzy mandates in practice where it's unclear how much power they have to implement, and then ultimately how much value is there for this transboundary cooperation? Is it something we give lip service to, but ultimately look towards other scales to implement at? In particular, are a lot of other institutions aligned to national scales and then not really acknowledging the transboundary? Those are some other key discussion threads coming out there. And then one final one, which I think makes the nice bridge to today's session, which I think came out of the notes again that I think our colleague at OSU put together, was agreements are a means to an end. So ultimately, there's a lot of focus on agreements. They're clear and tangible and measurable, but ultimately there should be an end, a vehicle to achieving things. So that getting back to that question we asked last year about purpose, purpose means practice. Purpose means doing. So I think with that sort of thrust, that motivated the focus for this year's session, which was learning cooperation that's doing things. And then given the theme of this year's World Water Week, it's, as Maria said earlier, is doing it in the context of climate pressure, looking at that doing cooperation that achieves things practically in the context of climate pressure. So basically, yeah, so in terms of the focus of this session, basically we're gonna, after I step off the stage, we're gonna hear 4 practical examples of cooperation that achieved something. I won't go into that. I think Garrett will just after me. And then we'll discuss what made these achievements possible. In terms of financing, data, other key enabling factors. And then finally, I think at the end of this discussion, we'll discuss potential for replication, some of the strategic levers. How did we get there? What enabled it? And then roadblocks. What are there key barriers out there that prevent this, that are stalling things? So with that bit of framing, I think I'll step off the stage and hand back to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that. And I hope with this we have framed what we want this conversation today to be about. We're now going to hear from 4 presentations that's going to take it into actual examples on the ground. How is this delivered? Before we can also get the opportunity to have these discussions in person with them. So I'm going to let you, Gareth, come on stage now, because he's going to be helping us getting through that part of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Maria. We're going to have 4 Ignite speakers to inspire us up on stage. We have a colleague, Bunyod, from IMI, who will be talking about the WEFE Nexus theme in relation to a practical project example implementation. We will have our colleague Maha from MBI, who will be covering the groundwater theme. Then we will have Michaela from TNC, who will be covering nature-based solutions. And last but not least, we will have Davison, who will be covering community-led climate resilience. But I don't think we need to labor this. If I could invite you, all 4 of you on stage right now to the 4 microphones. Could you join me here, please? As well. And basically the 4 speakers here, they have round about 4 minutes each. They will be, please, come, don't be shy. They will be setting the context, so you will have some information about the projects, the work that they've been doing. They've been asked to share examples of what was good and bad about what went on, and to close off with some lessons learned. So without further ado, if I can pass over to you, Bunyod, to take us through. Yeah, sure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bunyod Kholmatov. I work for the International Water Management Institute. And today I'm going to be presenting a case study from Central Asia on how water, energy, food, climate nexus intervention fostered cooperation in the region. So just to give very brief background, when I say Central Asia, I'm referring to 5 former Soviet republics in the region. And you probably heard about the drying Aral Sea, which was the result of the water mismanagement, which started during the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was known for their very large infrastructure constructions. And in the region, they built infrastructure so that to irrigate vast lands in downstream countries, to convert them into cotton lands, which led to diversion of water from 2 main transboundary rivers that used to feed the Aral Sea to irrigate these lands for growing cotton. And so during the Soviet Union, these large infrastructures were not that much of a problem, although they constructed some of the world's largest infrastructure, like multipurpose dams in the upstream countries, and some of the world's most complex irrigation infrastructure in downstream countries, like some of the world's longest canals. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, these infrastructure, they ended up in different parts of borders. And there was competition between countries, because the upstream countries, they do not have fossil fuels to generate their own electricity, so they rely on hydropower for 90% of their power generation. During Soviet times, the downstream countries used to provide them with fossil fuels or power to compensate for them to store water and release it during the vegetation period. But after the collapse, everyone was pursuing their own self-interest, and as a result, there was some water, energy, food nexus issues. But they were still able to come to an agreement, and they signed some water and energy agreements in the region to offset some of the tensions. But what a lot of people don't know is that in Central Asia, there are also dozens of small transboundary rivers, which are tributaries of these large 2 main rivers. So in these rivers are very important for the local livelihoods, the small transboundary tributaries, and because of their size, they are very vulnerable to climate change, and they have no agreements, or even if they do have agreements, they're very much outdated. So the solution was, IMI was in a consortium with 13 other organizations. We implemented a project called Hydro4U. It's an EU-funded project led by Tom. And in a nutshell, we wanted to demonstrate the sustainable small-scale hydropower technology in Central Asia, but we knew that there will be some additional benefits, the benefits that go beyond just sustainable hydropower production, right? And one of the things was, water, energy, food, climate nexus type of benefits, which I'm going to talk in the next slide. There were also sustainability considerations, and also we wanted to make it price competitive. So if you want to learn more, I have some flyers about the project. And during this project, we also did state-of-the-art data collection and modeling, and 2 demonstration sites were implemented where we showed these implemented these technologies, and one of them was in a small transboundary tributary that I mentioned about. So what was the result is that implementation of these small hydropower plants led to some of the benefits. One of them is food security, because now there was opportunity for the local people to store their crops, their harvest, because now they have stable supply of electricity. They also have clean energy, which was not necessarily available because these are very rural areas and mountainous areas with frequent blackouts happening before this intervention. There were also new economic opportunities, because now the locals saw an opportunity to build guest houses and invite tourism. So the tourism started blooming. There were also climate mitigation goals, of course, because hydropower is a clean energy source. We also considered some sustainable approaches like fish passes, environmental flows, etc. But the most important was some of the benefits of these small hydropower installations on water cooperation. Why? Because, like I said, we generated lots of data information. So that data information now can be shared, not just between the water management specialists across countries, but also between the different sectors within countries themselves. There were also frequent meetings between the specialists from both sides of the border. And we also, as a result, developed an agreement template, because we worked with these water specialists, and these people, they spent years working at the ground level, because they're at the small transboundary level, so they're not at the they're not sitting in the capitals, they're sitting in the regions where the action is happening, and they know what the obstacles are. They know what can be done to overcome these obstacles. So based on that, we basically worked on developing a template, which will hopefully be published soon. So the lessons learned is web nexus approach, like the small hydropower, directly can support SDGs, and that really helped governments to do a buy-in, and we hope that this momentum will continue. The next one is when you're starting at the small scale, we're reducing your risk, not just economic, but also political, and things can be done much faster, and you can gain the trust among the key stakeholders. With that, thank you very much.
Many thanks for that, Bunyad. That was excellent and very inspiring. Please, could I pass over to Maha now for groundwater?
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. All right. Good morning. My name is Maha Ismail. I'm from the Nile Basin Initiative. I'm the groundwater expert. The Nile Basin Initiative was formed in the late 90s of the last century, but it has been preceded by many engagements like the Take on Nile, like the joint vision, the shared vision, that followed a series of floods and droughts. So countries agreed that they should manage the water together in order to avoid the continuous series of floods and droughts. The conjunctive use management project is funded through GEF and the country contributions. We have 7 countries contributing to this. In the Nile Basin, there are more than 12 to 14 shared aquifers, mostly replenished by the Nile water, but in diverse formations. Some of them are in the fragmented basalt, some are in the alluvial deposits, and some are in the sandstone. So We are working now on 3 joint aquifers, transboundary aquifers. The first one is shared between Sudan and Ethiopia. It's called Gadarif Adigrat. This is a Nubia sandstone aquifer. And the other one is Mount Elgon, which is shared between Kenya and Uganda. And it is mostly fragmented basalt and tuff. And the third one is Kagera aquifer, which is mainly alluvial deposits shared by the 4 countries of Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda. From the previous studies, it showed that these aquifers are having enormous stress by the socio-economic activities that are performed by communities, and also there is a great threat of watershed management because most of the replenishment comes from the surface water. To reduce the stress on surface water and groundwater, we designed a conjunctive use for the 3 aquifers using MAR technology, Managed Aquifer Recharge Technology, using surface water to inject in the groundwater to maintain surface levels, water levels consistent for a long period of time. This is the design for Mount Elgon. There is a colonial dam that we are going to improve. It's a check dam. We are going to improve using nature material, nature produced material to form gabion blocks so we can construct the water. And then we are going to do in the river course, we are going to do injection boreholes because this is a stream that is running only 4 months a year. So we're going to use the water that will run through the flood time, and we're going to inject it in the groundwater. We are going to increase the amount of water using the check dam, and we are going to help the infiltration through direct injection boreholes within the river course itself. We are also going to have monitoring piezometers, as you can see down there. And we're going to have production wells so as to improve the drinking water supply in addition to water tower. This area in Kenya has clean water, but in Uganda, the water has iron content. So we are going to add treatment for iron and chlorination before distribution. This design for MAR is going to be, now we're working on it in Kagera area. This area is shared between Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Uganda along the river Kagera. So we're going to use the floodplains. There is a problem that population are living up in the mountains to avoid floods, but water is down. So sometimes they go down 16 meters, sometimes they go 25 meters, sometimes 40 meters to fetch water and go up. So we are going to enhance the infiltration through the flood plains and treat the water from sediments, inject the water in the boreholes, and then lift the water up using solar energy, and then store the water, and then to distribute to a distribution area where that increases the access to safe drinking water and reduces the use of artificial materials and improves drinking water situation. Thank you.
Many thanks for that. And now I think it's your turn, Michaela, right? Great, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Micaela Carvajal, as they mentioned. I work for the Nature Conservancy at the regional, the Latin American Water Program. I just have one slide, but I'll try to drive you through it. So I'm going to talk about this regional study on impacts of climate change on freshwater ecosystems and the potential of nature-based solutions to promote adaptation pathways in the Amazon basin. So the Amazon Basin is the world's largest transboundary freshwater ecosystem and a vital global climate regulator. It is shared by 9 countries and over 400 indigenous people groups. Yet today, climate change is intensifying floods, droughts, and temperature shifts. So we're seeing more seasonal floods, like what we're calling seasonal floods, so more rainfall in some periods of time and then also less in some other months. And this is threatening ecosystems, food and water security, and the livelihoods of millions of people that live in this basin. In this context, transboundary cooperation is essential. And as Diego was saying, I think that, our aim is to provide these policy recommendations to ideally achieve an agreement or like a cooperation transnational agreement. So hopefully that's the case. And this will allow countries to move from fragmented responses towards shared climate resilience strategies. So here I just wanted to show you that like our study if we can see like the first row, we see like we produced this mapping that includes like a multi-layer analysis that overlapped climate risks maps with data linked with local livelihoods, indigenous territory at the very, like in the first map, and then also fishing points. So with these multi-layers, we can see like where climate change is actually affecting and where we can have like the climate risk hotspots. In both maps, we see that the decrease in flows coincide with high-density population areas, and then also where fishing points are. So this means that water security, food security, and livelihoods and fisheries are being affected. Therefore, we wanted to showcase that the potential area, this is the second row, in square kilometers, where NPS can be implemented. So we designed some maps for protection, restoration, and improved management, specifically for agricultural practices, and then also ranching and food crops strategies. And as I said at the beginning, like what we wanted to have with this technical mapping is to develop policy recommendations to support transboundary cooperation in the whole basin, right? We think that such cooperation safeguards both the ecological and cultural identity of the basin, and we also say that without this coordination, hydropower and road development could be disrupting seasonal flows and also hindering fish migration and sediment flows. At the same time, this collaboration across borders strengthens scientific capacity. It enables countries to exchange data and build robust climate change that identify these hazards, vulnerability, and adaptation pathways at both regional and local scales. Moreover, with nature-based solutions, we're providing cost-effective solutions, resilient and measurable strategies that not only address climate threats, but also deliver multiple co-benefits. So biocorridors, and then food security and sustainability of livelihoods. So crucially, these solutions are most effective when rooted in local knowledge. As I said at the beginning, we have a lot of indigenous people living in these basins, and we think that there should be the stewards promoting and co-creating these adaptation pathways in the basin. So indigenous communities play a central role here. Their community-led conservation not only strengthens climate resilience, but also improves data quality and ensures that climate models reflect the real conditions on the ground. Regional cooperation promotes both ecological connectivity and policy connectivity through shared governance frameworks, agreements, as we heard from Diego, and then also potentially promoting platforms for dialogue, building trust, and aligning priorities. So finally, I want to end saying that if the Amazon Basin is to remain a functional climate regulation and a source of life, countries must strengthen transboundary cooperation and institutionalize indigenous leadership, ensuring that adaptation strategies reflect realities on the ground, respect rights, and secure this vital ecosystem for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, and over to you, Davison. You don't have slides, or you do?
People were drinking last night. I want to save their eyes.
Okay, good.
So they'll just listen to me.
Good.
Good morning, colleagues. Cooperation actually happens at a national level when you talk about transboundary cooperation. Because ordinarily, that's where you are going to get the Attorney General going through an agreement. It then goes through Parliament, the ministers sign, which is all beautiful. But cooperation is lived in the basin by the basin populations. So one of the things that we normally find is that the purpose that Jonathan talked about is then what should be the taste of the pudding. I want to give you an example from the Sawe River Basin shared by Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Zimbabwe is upstream, Mozambique downstream, and Zimbabwe is a bigger part of the basin and a much denser population that has already really exploited the basin, including in groundwater. To just give you a mental picture of what has happened in the Sawe watercourse, when I was growing up, there are parts of the river where we actually used to see hippos. Right now, local politicians actually organize beach volleyball to be played on the river base because there's no more water on the watercourse itself. There's no massive reliance on groundwater for the communities to survive. And I'm happy I have colleagues from the Southern Africa Groundwater Management Institute here, Jameson, but I can vouch for that. Now, the Sawe River Basin is part of a trilogy of basins, basically, because it's managed as a tri-basin with Buzi and Pungwe by the two countries of one RBO. Agreements or other treaties were signed for all the three basins, but it began with the Pungwe one signed in 2016, the Buzi one in 2019, but the Sawe agreement took much longer. It was signed in 2023, specifically because of complexities that came with weather-induced extremes that caused the two countries to really disagree on what they would do about water allocation. And up to now, they have not agreed. They've signed the agreement and then they put the water allocation as an addendum to say this part of the agreement remains a living, part of that we should continue revising. That's how contentious the issue was. And we have also supported the building of water institutions that include the establishment of an RBO secretariat and what they call data exchange protocol. All these documents are signed and in existence. But now the challenge came to all these very beautiful agreements are there. So in practice, we now have formalized cooperation. In practice, these contentious issues remain. And like I said, we have extreme scarcity, especially this dry season. And there are two big things that come out of it. One is threat to livelihoods, especially on the Mozambican side, where they believe that they got the short end of the stick that still has to be addressed. And second, there is increasing and growing human-wildlife conflict because all the small tributaries that were feeding into the river have dried up, and the water points, including the groundwater that Jameson colleagues have been supporting the communities RBOs with, become a merging point for different species, including human and non-human. So you're always going to have that angle where the kids are coming from school and they have to drink water somewhere, but, well, the crocodiles also have to drink water, right? And other species that may not always be friendly. So one solution that we had to come up with in a merging of two interventions, one which is bridge, well, at least I'm branded today, this is bridge, one of our flagship interventions now, UCN, which stands for Building River Dialogue for Governance, and another intervention that we're doing with ISD and Canada National in the landscape called Community-Based Adaptation on Scale. We went down to the local levels and tried to establish what we called community-based adaptation strategies. Now, we actually wanted to do a bottom-up approach to support the basin populations in, one, making sure that they sustainably use the resources, two, they assist the national level in complying with the provisions that are in the agreements by observing certain water uses and restricting certain unsustainable water uses. It's been a journey. We're still very much part of that journey. It's beautiful, it's frustrating. It has led to some successes and a lot of sleepless nights. I used to be twice this size, so this shows you what I mean when I say sleepless nights. But the interesting thing about the community-based adaptation is that when we say to the communities, we want word-based adaptation. For the colleagues who may not know what a word is, this is a constituency that ordinarily is about 4 or 5 villages, and the village population is normally less than 2,000 people on both sides of the border. So one of the things they emphasized on was community conservation funds. They wanted to be able to execute cooperation by building alternative livelihoods that are not controlled from national, things that they can do on the ground themselves, including small-scale irrigation, including non-timber forested product, including building of value chains and so forth. So it's looking good on the ground. Like I said, it's a growing story. Two big things that we can say from the results that you're already seeing on the ground is there's improved participation of the local basin population in transboundary cooperation, which is growing, which is showing much better cooperation than what we saw from the multi-stakeholder platforms that we were building before, that were straight jackets. And then we are beginning to see the fruits of catchment restoration, where you really see that the degradation that was experienced before, once the voices are local, things really start happening at a local level, and you can tap also into indigenous knowledge and so forth. Because of the interest in time, I can only say as a big lesson is, let's try as much as possible to bring down transboundary cooperation at the lowest level possible. It works. Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks, colleagues, for sharing your experiences with us, the good and the bad as well. Basically, that concludes the more serious part of this session. Now we move on to the slightly more fun and interactive part. But just before we get there, because we've had some new friends arrive along the way, I'll quickly summarize that the session is all about transboundary cooperation in the context of climate change. We've heard from our keynote speaker, Diego, that a lot of progress has been made, also from Jonathan, who helped frame the session. A lot of progress has been made, but there's much more to do. There are persistent challenges that we face, and what we heard from our inspiring speakers here today was sharing some experiences of what's working and doesn't work from their projects. And the intention now is we're going to form some discussion groups. So this is the part where I asked Maria to lock the door, make sure no one escapes. But I'll say straight off, you don't have to be a transboundary water expert. You just have to be curious and willing to exchange ideas. What we're going to do is have the experts sit at 4 tables. I will ask Bunyod if you could sit at this table here, and you will be talking about Wefe Nexus. I would ask Maha if you could join this table over here, just by the panel there, and we will talk about groundwater there. If I could ask you, Michaela, if you would sit over towards the corner there, and then we can talk about NBS solutions, nature-based solutions. And last but not least, Davison, if you could sit here, and then we can talk about community-led, climate resilient approaches. And what we will, one second. Yes, sorry. Oh, thanks whoever did that for me. That was great. So the questions we will be discussing are these. And then we'll do this for about 20 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll reconvene and we will invite our speakers back to the platform here, and they will miraculously turn into panelists. And our colleague Belinda, I can't see you, Belinda, where are you hiding? Okay, our colleague Belinda will come along and facilitate an interactive panel discussion where you'll also be invited to contribute. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is if you'd like to have speak with Bunyod about WEF Nexus, please go there. With Maha on groundwater, please go there. With Michaela on nature-based solutions here, and Davison on, there you are, on community-led climate-resilient approaches, then please go here. Thank you. We'll reconvene in about 20 minutes with Belinda. colleagues. We'll be closing off the discussions in about 2 minutes, so if you can begin to round up. Thank you. Is it working? Oh, thanks. Colleagues, could I ask you to conclude your discussions now? Thank you. And don't worry, if you feel your voice wasn't heard, I'm sure Belinda will be using every opportunity to provide a platform for your voice. Could I ask Maha, could you join us up on the stage? Bunyod? Davison, can you join us? And Michaela, please.
Table out a little bit, just slightly. Then there's all standing on top of each other, and I'll stand over here. Colleagues, can you hear me? The good news is the conversation will continue. The bad news is I need to please get our panelists on the stage. Do you want to find some space here?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, a little bit squashed. Well, thank you. We weren't sure how those discussions were going to go at the tables, but it looks like it was very lively. Hard to extract our panelists and get them to move. I heard the words trust, relationships. So let's start with that. I mean, basically these questions for me distill into what have we learned? What do we need to do more of? And what can we do better? What do we need to let go of? So without putting words in your mouths, just to get first some reflections, quick summary, from each group, so through the panelists, and then I'll just go to the floor to make sure that they represented you accurately. So you'll have a chance to add if there's anything absolutely critical. But the objective here isn't to go into a whole lot of detail. The objective here is to distill some high-level messages on how do we enhance transboundary cooperation. So if I can start with you, I'll just go in the order of the flow here. If I can start with you, Banyad.
Sure, thank you. So our group is quite diverse, like a lot of different backgrounds, disciplines represent, but so most of the examples were from the Nexus, right? So capacity building is moving very slowly. So although people can recognize when you tell them what the WEF Nexus benefits and trade-offs are, they understand, but it's not spreading as fast as necessary, I guess. So the progress is slow, but there's still some examples, like the case we heard where fish and electricity benefits from multipurpose dams are shared. So it's not necessarily labeled as Nexus, but in practice those exist, and that dam was built in 1980s. So there are more plans to build them. But what would be like, how do we start from scratch? To that question, I don't think we could agree. Data came up quite a lot, so we need data good assessments, what the benefits and trade-offs would be. But to do that, you basically need finances, and you also need buy-in from stakeholders, right? So they need to trust and work with them. So that, and also decision support system came out as, like something that can guide people into making good decisions. And for number 3, unfortunately, we could not necessarily cover that one.
All right. But some good insights in terms of the nexus, the need for data, finance. So key ingredients, I would call that, of transboundary cooperation. Any quick things that the group would like to add? One opportunity. Thank you. Is there a mic? Okay, I can hear you. But the people, the recording and the people online might not hear the shouting.
Thank you. That saves energy. I mean, my energy. So just a few things to add. One is early participation of communities rather than doing impact assessments, doing strategic environmental assessments, and looking at the cumulative impact when multiple projects are being done, like at the planning stage or before the planning stage, and including community perspectives within that would be key to have all the other things that we were talking about.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's an important addition. Michaela, can I go to you? You don't need to go through the 3 questions in sequence, but what have you learned? What have we learned? What do we need to do more of?
So we actually didn't go through the questions because, it was interesting because, we brought like all these technical thing based on nature-based solutions, but our group was more on like the policy, legal representatives. So I think that, the conclusions that we reached were that with nature-based solutions, we could use them as a vehicle to promote the benefits that they could be, that could be gained at the national level, local level, and then also like potentially international. But we didn't see we were talking about different geographies, like how could we install these models to promote data and more scientific information for these agreements. But we saw that it's not very possible or easy to have like multilateral ones, but maybe bilateral. And also, even though they cannot be like multinational in this way, like they could be multi-jurisdictional. So we saw some examples in California where you have like diverse water districts that have agreed to do like water restoration activities. And then also some, there was one binational agreement that was mentioned between the US and Mexico. So we were saying that, at the end, data sharing is needed for this, data sharing and communication for countries to prioritize water storage and like also to analyze like how these nature-based solutions or protection or restoration can bring other co-benefits. And and then like also, bringing like the buzzwords that are like for example, like connectivity, biodiversity, promoting local livelihood security and stuff. So it was more of like how do we bring the technical data to like these multilateral negotiation and agreement.
So we're hearing quite a lot today, I think, about bottom-up approaches, which I think is also the point that was added from our colleague at that in your group, Banyat. What's going through my head, we'll come back to this a little bit later, but the relationship between the transboundary agreements and these kinds of needs and the bottom-up solutions, which nature-based solutions obviously gives us an entry point for. Is there anything, I don't know where your group was over there, anything important that Michaela missed? No? Good. Great job. Davison?
Thank you. We had two very interesting examples, actually. One from Lesotho in Southern Africa, Orange and Glory River Basin in Lesotho. Lesotho is actually the water tower that serves South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, where the headwaters is Orange are. There has been a lot of overgrazing because of, it's looking at a very active animal population domestically. So this has been getting onto wetlands a lot. And there's intervention that they currently have called the Rinoka, which means we are a river. And in it, they have what they call integrated catchment management, which goes down all the way to local level to sub-catchment councils. And because it is currently, we can say, a healthy budget, right? Yes, it has been able to address it, or at least to get the communities to participate in ICM, integrated catchment management. And we also have an example from Central Asia. A colleague from Oxfam was telling us between India and Nepal, where they've been working especially with women to help them access funding. And I found that one very interesting because the intervention is not about giving the community money, but helping the women to access government funding that has been set aside for climate finance. So they train them, help them write proposals, do budgets and so forth, so that they're able to continue doing this on their own after the project ends. And well, I don't want to keep going on, but we also had an example on data from South Sudan, but we couldn't get time to get into all of that. Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm really appreciating, I think, also vis-a-vis what's already been said, the example of integrated catchment management that goes right from community level all the way through to the transboundary level. Because if Lesotho doesn't protect its catchments, we in South Africa don't have water. 40%, 40% of Gauteng's water, the economic hub of the region, is coming from there. So some very great examples that are coming out, and we'll flesh them out a bit more. Can I go to you, please? Interested to hear what groundwater perspective you brought into this.
Yeah, we talked about data sharing across sectors, nationally and across countries, regionally, and the challenges facing data sharing, validation, quality assurance, and use, and how it impacts security and what are the challenges, although we have protocol of data sharing, but we are still struggling with data. But I see how we can move out with this is to manifest and to show examples of benefits cooperation, how we are getting good benefits from the cooperation. It has to be physically proved and physically manifested, projected. And what is requested from partners, development partners and enablers, is to keep engaging, mobilizing engagement with countries across sectors, regionally, and across countries to help them sit together, discuss their problems, their fears, their concerns, their interests, and also development partners to help in making the benefits of cooperation through projects, physical projects, very seen, very visible, so others will be convinced to join. Thank you.
Another great and additional dimension around the benefit sharing and benefits-based cooperation. I forgot to ask on Davison's group, so on either of these two groups, is there anything from the groups? Please go ahead. No, the microphone will come. Exactly.
No, if we say community-led climate resilience and bottom-up approaches, then I think something to reflect is also how do we get the climate finance down. So then you also need decentralized funding mechanisms to enable communities to plan their own projects, get them financed. So it's not only community-led planning; it's also community-led financing. So that's a big.
I've got this image.
Top-line message I want to.
I've got an image going through my head of the Green Climate Fund adjusting itself to community-led finance. It's an interesting challenge and question.
The GCEF.
Oh, the GCCF. All right. Is this from another group? Yeah. Thank you.
Group, yeah.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question maybe to more than our panelist, because from our group discussion, it became apparent that a multilateral approach can have benefits in the sense that showing the positive examples of other countries sharing the data can incentivize a third country in the multilateral agreement to also come on board, whereas the other lady on the panel, sorry, I don't have your name, mentioned that bilateral approaches are easier than multilateral approaches. So I would love to hear a bit more from the panelists about their take on bilateral agreements versus multilateral and the benefits.
If you don't mind, I'm going to hold that question. I won't forget. But I just want to wrap up. We've got some really good insights, I think, on what we need to do more of. So let's focus on the positive. So I think definitely the more of is the data sharing. I think all of you mentioned that. But I'm hearing, as I said earlier, a lot around local, perhaps through to transboundary. So I suppose the question that's going on in my head as well is how do you make that link? Nicely, in the Lesotho example, with integrated catchment management, because there is a clear thread, but how do we make that link always visible so that we can get to that benefit sharing kind of approach? So I think this is an important thing to think about. And then, in that context, also the question of agreements, bilateral versus multilateral. And when is the one important and when is the other important? So I think these are important questions that we want to think about today. My observation on agreements, and interested to get the panelists' perspective, and also bearing in mind the question that came up here, is that we had a presentation this morning that showed, for example, that drought wasn't represented in many agreements, wetlands weren't mentioned. They also mentioned public participation. That was when my ears really pricked up. So we've been through a process of revising a river basin agreement. You cannot possibly cater for absolutely everything in an agreement. It's just not possible. So then the question becomes, how do you make this agreement optimal, and what do you really need to govern? And again, I think it comes back to, when do you really need a transboundary agreement and what do you need it to do? So what we're hearing here are some good insights for that. Data sharing, using data as an incentive. Data sharing as an incentive for other countries to come up. And to also think about the benefit sharing aspects. Not that I think an agreement should be a benefit sharing agreement, but how do you make those benefits visible? How do you deal with a situation when one country in a transboundary basin has to look after the headwaters and keep them in a pristine state? And other countries that are downstream are not paying for that but need the benefits of it. How do you balance that? So I'm just wondering how we can think about what we've heard today, transition us to a different way of thinking about the agreements. Would any of our panelists like to take a stab?
Yeah, because yesterday we had a meeting with the Mekong and we had a meeting with the Danube. China is the greatest country where the water flows it's upstream, yet it is not a signatory of the agreement. Yet they are sharing data, they are cooperating, and we need to get exposed to these kind of examples to see how did they work out their problems. Also, the DINOBA, I learned yesterday that some countries are not part of the DINOBA agreement. So, and there are 13. So how come some are still sharing a data although they are not part of the agreement? That shows goodwill is there, and then the political will is also there. How can we move from being opponents fighting each other to joining even if we don't sign? We need to get exposed to this experience.
Yeah.
To learn.
Excellent. Thank you. Davison.
I think I actually have another question to throw back to people about that. My experience in our region of Southern Africa has been that, because you're asking a good question and a good observation when you say there's no way you're always going to have everything you need in agreement, because especially now, things keep changing. I think the question, does everything need to be in the agreement? Does every scenario has to be thought through and inserted in the agreement, or can we just have a framework agreement that covers certain topics and leaves the details for management at certain levels, including the bilaterals we're talking about? Because in some cases, I'll give just our colleague Pena could not be here. In the Okavango, where the huge disagreement set by three countries, Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. Angola was not in a position to use the headwaters for a very long time because of some civil strife. But Botswana has a massive Ramsar site, a big delta, which is an angle of the economy way, way downstream. Now, Angola was saying, can we have an agreement that allows us to grow sugar on 100,000 hectares of the basin upstream, because our people need that? Botswana was saying, well, if you use that kind of consumptive water use, then you are damaging the delta, and it's both the UNESCO and the Ramsar site. We can't do that. But they have an Okacom agreement signed in 2002. Now, when you think back at that, then you can realize that as long as there is a framework agreement that guides all this discussion, maybe we are better served by continuous interaction that builds trust, and we can then build these other small agreements, and there are things that we can do without an agreement as well, as long as we now work together better. Maybe it's bespoke, but yeah.
Can I just see if there are any thoughts on this from the floor? How do we make optimal use of the large number of agreements that our colleagues have surfaced in their analysis? How do we make optimal use of those? Are there any insights?
That's a food of soil.
We make sure they're on it. How do you do that? Trust.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I think you've got to recognize that agreements have to be fair. They have to. We talked about making the benefits visible and felt, right? So if the agreements are built on solid knowledge and sound principles, and also are balanced in a sense, so that they actually function without even if political turmoil happens, right? They still work. Right?
Mm.
And we know, for example, many examples, Nile is one, right, where we have old agreements that are causing, some political discourse later on when the political realities change upstream and so on. So it's very important that the agreements are built on a good foundation.
Yeah. So a solid foundation, and I think it also supports your point around a framework agreement. Can I go to that colleague? Are there any other hands? Let me just take a stack before. I need to start wrapping up, I'm told. All right. No more hands, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Oxfam. I didn't introduce myself before. Just to add with that, we have to recognize the power inequalities within the countries and across countries, and also determine which principles should not change. Like there are treaties which come to an end after certain points. Principles shouldn't change. Like there shouldn't be an end time for that. But of course, like the detail can be discussed. And I think nobody talked about free prior informed consent in the room. Unfortunately, that has still not been realized the way it should be, and I think that should be reflected.
Okay. Thank you. It's an excellent point about principles. And I think, back to, so I studied law originally. Justinian's Institutes, which goes back a seriously long way, first set out the basis for the precautionary principle, for example. And these principles have been around for centuries, absolutely for centuries. So that's an excellent point. All right, so I need to wrap up. So thank you to the panelists. Can we give them a big round of applause? And just some key takeaways. I think what we're hearing today is, and I've been actually hearing it all week, is the need for local solutions. The WEFI nexus, I've added an E. The WEFI nexus, the nature-based solutions, and community-based adaptation, community-led approaches, all of these are giving us the impetus for local solutions. And it just struck me today that we're talking about cooperation at different levels, aren't we? We're talking about cooperation at the political level, at a technical level, between countries, but we're also talking about cooperation at a very local level. And I think we probably need to be much more intentional about building both. And so to end with my own question around what can the agreements do. I think for me, and just to add to Davison's point about framework agreements, is the agreement needs to set the terms for cooperation, not deal with droughts and floods and ecosystem protection. And, it needs to deal with things like data sharing, public participation, community-led, community-based approaches, and also how the countries are going to engage with each other and honor each other, to Joachim's point, and honor the agreements. So I think we've had some very, very good discussions, some very good takeaways, I hope, for IUCN, UNEP, ME, as our hosts for the session. And I wish you all the best of the end of this World Water Week. Thank you.